Just want to say hello and thank you for coming to my little session and talking about basic metabolic pathways. So, in the human body, there are three main energy systems that are utilized. There is the ATP to PCR, there is glycolysis, which can either be aerobic or anaerobic, and then we have oxidative phosphorylation. Now, with these three systems, they all have their own role to play in the body, and sometimes one could primarily dominate over the other in a workout or just in general whenever a person is doing something to produce energy that we need. So the ATP PCR is going to be more so towards short, intense bursts of energy. So that being said, a great example would be something like a box jump, or if you were just doing a max movement of, let's say, you put 245s on a bench press and you push it as quick as you can. That would be the ATP PCR. Glycolysis is a little bit more intense on the other hand. So instead of just doing that one box jump, it's going to be primarily more so towards if you are doing 8 reps, or let's say you do it for time for 20 seconds. So a great example would be HIIT exercises, high interval intense training. And then when it comes to oxidative phosphorylation, that is going to be, we'll say, the more chill out of the group, the three systems. Oxidative phosphorylation is to where it's more so low, moderate energy that's being used, or effort is being used. So, for example, it can be a light jog. It could be, I was getting ready to go fishing. It could be fishing. It's not really something that takes a lot of energy. But just going back to what I was saying about how each energy system can take over, although oxidative phosphorylation might be the primary energy source for me in fishing, there are going to be moments to where I possibly could get hooked up on a fish. Potentially that first rip up where I go to set the line, it's pretty intense. So that would be the ATP to PCR system. And then while I'm fighting the fish and using my core and the lower body to try and reel the fish in, that could be considered more glycolysis would be into play. And then once I finally reel in the fish, hopefully, and it doesn't get away, then oxidative phosphorylation will kick back in as my effort levels drop, so to speak. So with that being said, today we're going to focus primarily on oxidative phosphorylation. Now with oxidative phosphorylation, the main primary source of nutrient for energy is going to be carbohydrates. It is carbohydrates because carbohydrates can yield the most ATP, because with that they can yield almost 32 to 34 ATP in total. And with carbs, the very first thing that enters into the cycle, into the TCA cycle, Krebs cycle, citric acid cycle, whatever one chooses to call it, is going to be pyruvate into acetyl-CoA. Now, when it comes to carbs, they can give off more pyruvate because of the glucose that's there. Now, when it comes to fat and proteins are something that we want to stay away from completely in the body because we don't want to break down muscle. Fats, on the other hand, can only produce one acetyl-CoA, or basically very low amounts of pyruvate. So once it enters into the TCA cycle, it's not really going to give off too much energy. Now, the whole purpose of the TCA cycle is to get NADH and FADH2. Those two things are going to be passed off through the mitochondrial membrane, and this is where the electron transport chain comes in. And within the double membrane of the mitochondria, there is going to be 4 complexes. There is another complex, coenzyme Q, and cytochrome C, and then as well as ATP synthase within that membrane, and there is an electron gradient. So outside of the membrane is going to be a influx or a huge amount of protons. And essentially what happens is that these protons are pumped from inside the mitochondria to outside, and the electron is then taken across this membrane to create that gradient. So before how I said that we needed NADH and FADH2, NADH's proton gets pumped through complex 1. FADH2 gets pumped through complex 2. And once they're pumped, their electrons go from complex 1 to coenzyme Q to complex 3 to cytochrome C to complex 4. And with each one, it's just protons being pumped out as the electrons go through. At the end of it, however, oxygen comes in and is then given 2 protons to create water. And with that being said, at the end of, after the electron transport chain, after the 4 complexes, there is ATP synthase. And ATP synthase essentially creates ATP from ADP because of all of the protons given in the electrons in that situation. Is able to generate ADP to ATP, thus giving us the energy. Again, oxidative phosphorylation produces a massive amount of ATP. So compared to all of the others, they're all important in their own way, but this process is one of the processes that really keeps you going, functioning as a person and just in regular daily life activities. With glycolysis and ATP to PCR, those are a little bit more on the, if you are an athlete or if you're super active, because you need that energy right away. Or with oxidative phosphorylation, you're able to generate the energy that you need in order to just survive and live.